Here's a name that everybody knows, Amelia Earhart.
Yes, this is the Lockheed Vega 5B, and in this plane, she became the first woman to fly nonstop and solo across the Atlantic Ocean in 1932. She knew she had to do this on her own to be taken seriously as a pilot. Obviously, 99.9% of women were not going to be aviators in the 1920s and 30s. So how is a woman of that era going to do that when everything is against it? She and George Putnam, who was her promoter and later her husband, they had to put together this entire package of how she was going to earn her way in aviation. And so she'll go and she'll make a flight, and then she knows that she has to lecture or she has to write a book or do a magazine article or whatever it takes then to bring in the revenue. What am I going to do next? Because I want to be in aviation.
Laid the groundwork for dreams.
Well, her legacy is all about what she did as an individual woman and then leading other women into it. She helped establish the 99s, the first women's aviation organization, which is still with us today. And so people need to understand how hard it was to do that, but that's how motivated she was. And she wanted to bring other women along too, and she worked very hard at that as well.
That's amazing.